Welcome to Cosmic Dream Sanctuary. I'm Daniel Rekshan, and I will read to you an illustrated book that I wrote about 10 years ago. This book is called A Preface and Epilogue to the History of the World. The way I'll read it to you, because it is an illustrated book, is to read the text and then to describe the imagery on the page. So if you're tuning in through an audio format, you're going to be able to participate in the imagery. And if you're tuning in through a video format, you are invited to explore the imagery with me. Just like anything, I invite you to really set aside any notion of participating simply by the conceptual level. So I invite you to participate in receiving this message at all levels of your being. And you can do that simply by acknowledging that you don't have to understand this book like you might understand a philosophy text or something. This is a poem, this is a prose poem, this is an art experience rather than as a direct linguistic communication. And so in that way, I invite you to simply tune into your breath, tune into a sense of expanded awareness as you relax into your breath and presence, and simply allow the words and description of imagery to wash over you, knowing that you can explore deeper the message and explore it conceptually at your own leisure by downloading the book. You can do that at cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/message. A Preface and Epilogue to the History of the World by Daniel Rekshan. Preface. There exists a place, a time before birth and after death. For those in cyclic existence, it is the apex of the wheel's turn, or perhaps its axle. For those who transcend the cycle, it is the doorway to the beyond. Everyone has been there. It is the source of every individual, from the most enlightened to the greatest sufferer. Here's an image. It is a circular image. It is a dark circle, but out of the center there is radiating different aspects of the human form. It is the fetal form, like that in the womb, of growing, of becoming an adult, of coupling in union, of being an adult, and then finally an old person. It is the space between moments, the time between dimensions. It is that which holds the contents of consciousness. It is that which is conscious. From this place, the spirit enters its earthly vessels, vitalizing the material fetus. To this place, the individual returns, in which the illusions of this life dissolve. The phenomenon of knowledge, the fact that we can know, occurs because the individual eternally maintains proportion to this place. Knowledge is recollection because the object is not encountered through itself, but through the displacement of spirit in that eternity, i.e., illuminated by the primal gnosis of being. History is a type of knowledge in which the eternal spirit encounters itself. The knower and the known share identity in the encounter. The eternal consciousness embraces itself in studying its temporal manifestation. A proportion is drawn between the eternity of the observing present, which is the eternal now, and creative progression of forms through history. Here we have a semicircular image. It is of a hexagon. There are, at the intersection of three of the points, every other point is what appears to be an angelic form with wings coming out. The feet are at the outside of the circumference of the circular, the hexagon form. At the other points is a spiral energy. The arms of the angels form another hexagon, or it's almost a circle now, and between them form this sort of beautiful Trinity knot experience, and it reveals a triangle at the very center of this image. There are spiral forms that are in between the heads of these angels. Spirit is that eternal place, the omnipresent source. It is divine, universal, beautiful, good, and knowing. It creates itself in itself for itself. We are it, it is us, we are each other, and all is divine. True recollection is self-knowledge. Any knowledge is knowledge of the self. The cosmos is spirit knowing itself. The cosmos is the self. The self is spirit. All is divine. We have an image here of a sun emerging up and out of the waters, and in the background is the crescent moon. There are stars in the sky. There is a sense of radiance emerging from the sun. We get ahead of ourselves, and the identities of divinity do not make sense. We do not stand at the center of the wheel, rather at its circumference. We have not recollected our true nature, rather we are recollecting it. This is not spirit approaching spirit in eternity, rather mind seeking truth in the space-time manifold. Here we have an image. It is set within the geometric forms of the golden ratio spiral. There is a figure on the left-hand side is looking into a mirror that stands between it and the actual spiraling in of that golden ratio spiral. His left hand is touching the mirror, and the mirror's image returns that experience, so that they are holding hands, it appears, and looking at each other, this figure and its reflection. I do not know what the self is. I look at myself and find an aggregate of thoughts, emotion, and memories. There is no divinity in that assemblage, only humanity. I look closer, and I see the eternal looking. It is not me, but I am conscious by it. It holds the aggregate together and declares them observed, experienced. It is eternal. All time that ever is experienced passes through it. It is omnipresent. All traversed space comes through it. I turn from the circumference and gaze at the center. It is now. Here is an image of form of human figure underneath the radiant sun, and this figure is walking and holding its hand above its eyes as if it's seeking for something. The land goes down into the water, and there is an image of water on the right-hand side of the page, and above the water is a star field with the moon, the crescent moon. There is a human figure with both arms extending, appearing to walk towards the land. The personality, the mind of this writing vessel, this speaking vessel, this material form has beheld the realm of spirit. This mind of a space-time entity has transcended space-time, has entered eternity. The recollection of divinity is a member of my aggregate of memory. Spirit encountered spirit through my earthly vessel, through this body and mind. This encounter has or will happen through every individual in cyclic existence because they are existent individuals. I have a memory of the eternity before birth that has taken me 25 years to regain, to recollect. I have been baptized in a sea of gnosis, and yet I forget the truth, the beautiful. Recollection of eternity is now in my memory aggregate, but it emerged in time. Conversely, it was not always there. The eternal encounter is a temporal occurrence. Ignorance is a fact of my existence. I see that it is a general condition of humanity. We suffer and create the causes of suffering because we are ignorant. Why and how have we forgotten our true and divine nature? There is zooming in of that image of the figure underneath the sun with the hand on its eyes, with the figure walking in the water underneath the moon. It is just a larger image. It is more clear and distinct. I, with many before me, say that ignorance occurs as spirit clothes itself in matter in order to know itself. Knowledge, beauty, form, existence, all are proportion. Spirit must leave itself and enter matter in order to enter into a proportion with itself. We know that spirit entered matter and knew itself because we are aware of ourselves as individuals with a continuous consciousness holding divergent contents. Time passes, objects arise and dissolve, the aggregate of self grows and dissipates, and yet we are continuously, constantly aware of the changing. Here is an image of letter omega in the sun. There are patterns of energy surrounding it. It is very geometrical. It has very regular kind of pulsations of energy out of it. There appears to be points of light pushing through this field. Spirit holds matter. Through matter, spirit knows itself because it is that which endures in the changing, that which always knows the changing. The eternal now is the spirit. Its encounter with matter is experience. Once again, we get ahead of ourselves and convolute the matter. All that must be said, all that must be understood, is that every individual spirit, and spirit itself, exists outside of material space-time, and that they choose to enter the manifold. It forgets itself in the entering. So now we have the image of that sun holding the omega, going down into the waters. The eternity is deep. Our four-dimensional manifold subsists in eternity like a piece of paper caught in the wind. All points of space-time are accessible to one in the eternity. All occurrences in space-time are simply convolutions of that surface, as if a lattice of clockworks were drawn on the page. Destiny is the connections between the gears, while free will is an event at right angles to this surface. Before death, we inhabit the depths of eternity. It was our vessel, and we were in it. We were it. Desire and intention occurred. A gear was chosen, an earthly vessel, a body. The eternity passes through the single temporal point. The gear is turned, birth. In eternity, it meets itself on the other side, death. All is eternal, yet an event occurred. Motion took place beyond all time. The spirit is different, changed, developed. Growth occurs. So we have an image of clockwork drawn on a page, and there are three triangles, pointed triangles, headed towards that, representing perhaps wind or something like that. And as that energy passes through this paper on which the clockworks are drawn, there are branching patterns of like roots or tree branches that emerge up and out of it. For the third time, we are ahead of ourselves. We are not in eternity now, rather in the temporality of thought. We can only see movement, which is not yet true motion. The fact of the cognition of these words reveals two contrasting aspects of recollection, which are like the faces of a coin. First, recollection of eternity occurs in matter. Otherwise, material symbol could not be encoded into experience. Second, we are now in matter, on the wheel and turning, and not in eternity again. The spirit in the eternal must now find itself outside itself. We have yet to see the path at right angles to all earthly motion. The enlightenment will occur and occurs in eternity, but it has not yet occurred. We have yet to summon the courage to follow that path and meet ourselves. Otherwise, spirit merely enters matter and dissipates into endless convolutions. Here we have that image of the sun with the omega in it and the three triangles pushing into the image of the clockworks drawn on that piece of paper. And on the other side of the piece of paper, there is a growing of seems like an energy field of waves. The whole figure itself forms something like a triangle. Let us consider the space-time in which spirit now finds itself. Remember that all points in the manifold are equidistant to eternal desire, to the moment before incarnation. Spirit chose this moment through which to meet itself, As the decision was made, ignorance occurred, and we find ourselves in the vortices of matter. Clockwork appears to have greater reality than vitality, physics more truth than imagination or compassion. We confuse ourselves with our vessels. So here again is the imagery of the golden spiral and golden ratio. There is a figure on the left which appears to be human, with arms outstretched, and on the figure on the right, looking in towards the center. Both figures are kind of looking in towards the center. The figure on the right has wings of an angel perhaps. In the center is the golden ratio spiral, but it has imagery of clockwork in it. We must find the path that doesn't exist. We must find the right angle to all material motion. If this path isn't found, we will continue in the cycle of ignorance and suffering. The phenomenon of history is the arena for spiritual development. Space-time and matter meet spirit and eternity in mutual embrace through history. Their embrace is history. Matter changes, forms emerge and evolve. There is no stasis, only dynamic equilibrium. Mineral becomes vegetable, vegetable becomes animal, animal becomes human, and human divine. The present is eternal. The past is forever consumed in its own transcendence, sublimation. Each moment dies in its passing in order to become something greater. The material world is not a mere convolution of the same. It is not clockwork. The conservation laws are not destiny. Spirit enters matter and forms arise. Wholes are greater than the sum of parts. We, as embodied spirits, rather our vessels themselves may recognize spirit's historical interaction with matter through the doctrine of evolution. The intellect of the body may deduce an evolution of forms. A study and participation in history enables the vessel to participate in spiritual sublimation. Here we have an image that is reminiscent of the shape of the golden ratio spiral imagery, clockwork imagery, yet there's organic forms within the clockwork. One of the gears, cogs, does have an omega in it, and there are spirals and paths and tree-like forms growing within. Countless individuals have awakened before us and sublimated the cyclic existence. Many taught pupils. Many expressed their wisdom in art or literature. While teachings are eternal and eternally beautiful and true, they somehow become insufficient. Here is an image of the sun, under which is gear with another sun at the center of the gear, and there are three human forms. The one on the left is sitting in meditation, the one on the center is upright, and the one on the right has a sort of arms outstretched, reminiscent of the crucified Christ. Spirit must find spirit through a material vessel, not a spiritual vessel. The enlightenment and its expression occurs in this vessel. Spirit always finds itself at right angles to material motion. The primary experience of matter is change. While the paths of the previous enlightened eternally point to eternity, their intersection with material motion is now less than rectilinear. Matter changes, and we cannot get on their paths from this here and now. We are already on a path here and now. This spiritual vector, which points away from cyclic existence, the personality, the mind of this writing vessel, this material form has beheld the realm of spirit. This mind of and toward eternity has its beginning point in the moving vessel of body. We are fortunate to be able to identify the material change with creative evolution. We are fortunate to have the examples of the previous enlightened. We are fortunate to be in history and to study history. Epilogue. And so now we have a form, this The image is of a rectangle, but the right side of the rectangle, the boundary of the rectangle, isn't part of the border. It comes out of the image. On the left-hand side of this rectangle is a spiral that spirals out and into this wave pattern, out of which circles and imagery of sun and people, many of which hold an omega, right, is emanating, and it's sort of breaking open at the right-hand side of this image. The greatest question now is, why has spirit chosen now to meet itself in matter? The answer is found in the history of the world. History consists in the progression and evolution of forms. Matter, in its conserved convolutions, become arranged in unprecedented forms. These forms change and create greater and more unprecedented forms. The emergence of intelligible forms is the action of spirit in matter, rather than matter on matter. Form occurs as the eternal spirit encounters particular matter. The form of an object is identical to its experience in the most universal instance of the eternal now, i.e., the cosmos. Consider the formula spirit meeting spirit through matter from another perspective. Spirit passes through matter in its action of self-embrace and impels the temporal progression of forms. The action of spirit is the difference between the whole and sum of part, between predecessor and successor. Therefore, our earthly perspective, the spiritual path, may be recognized as the historical progression. Enlightened activity occurs with matter in the stream of time. The first step of spirit is taken from the present material condition. The arena of our spiritual development is the world present to us. The study of history and the current condition is the study of spirit. Whatever makes this world now more beautiful, just, compassionate, efficient, knowledgeable, etc., is a spiritual action. Such a creative act is a motion rectilinear to the manifold and points the way to divinity. Spirit meets itself in matter through a recognition of and production of particular manifestations of eternal forms. In such activity, the spirit is now the eternal, now embraces the spirit in the material form. Two divergent streams of spirit meet in a beautiful or compassionate experience, that which experiences and that which is experienced. That the object of experience is experienced as beautiful is its elevation from matter to spirit. So again, we see the image of a clockwork cogs drawn on a piece of paper, and this line, the spiral, remembering from the first image of the epilogue, there are rectilinear triangular forms approaching this from the left. Going off to the right are tree-like branching patterns that are reminiscent of branches or roots. We find ourselves in a very unique place in history. We are in a critical moment in the exponential growth of science, technology, and population. Science and technology has grown so rapidly only where they have interfaced with corporate profit in a limited time frame. Their cancerous growth was fueled by corporations and governments, which in turn are controlled by individuals. We have so much material presence that our individual spiritual deficiencies are magnified to a global scale. We are too many and our technology too great for us to use it without responsibility. Death by ignorance threatens. We must spiritually develop as a global organism and entity, or else we will perish. Every individual must wish the benefit of every other and the all. Perhaps it is more than coincidence that we develop the technology for global communication, i.e. coordination, just as our population and habits pass the environmental tipping point. Here we see imagery of cogs and also star fields. There's the sun with its rays, somewhat looking like a cog, a clockwork cog, but then the earth is surrounded by a 5-pointed cog meeting the moon with other cog-like gears, sun as well. There's a face drawn on the earth. It is a material fact that humanity has changed, evolved. Every material individual is connected with every other. We share identity with one another through our collective responsibility for the state of our environment and our neighbors. We are not solely individuals anymore. We are members of a unique community. Our minds comprehend the globe, the world, the cosmos. Our bodies and minds are so entangled with each other and the planet that the spiritual vector must now be drawn rectilinear to the collective network. We are concerned with the clock now and not just the cog. Prior to this historical moment, spiritual development occurred in an individual. The individual often created cultural echoes, but primarily development began and ended in the individual. Christ declared that there will always be the poor and needy. So here we have an image of the sun and moon and earth and star field. There are human figures standing above the earth, holding hands as a circle. If humanity is to continue to be the vessel of spirit, then humanity must change itself. The individual must transform the world. We must save ourselves by saving the poor. We must transcend the world through activity in the world. The individual must become the world. We must together become a being greater than our aggregation in society or nation. Otherwise, conflicting individual desire or inertia will prevent true global action. Here we have an image set off by a strong border, almost a square image. There is a circle of sun, and there's of gears as kind of a circular image. There is the sun up top, radiating imagery, and there's faces and there's cogs with the omega sign in there. There's the crescent moon and also the earth set within a cog gear image. And so the whole thing forms a circle. In a catastrophe such as the consequences of the last century's action, should they come to fruition, we would lose our very humanity. The only way to prevent the fruition of material consequences is through spiritual development. An individual sublimates sin and death through identification with spirit and spiritual activity. Likewise, the human collective will sublimate pollution, injustice, and collapse through identification with the spirit and spiritual activity. Art, religion, social justice, and any area of human activity that is clearly an expression of spirit must grow as exponentially as our science and population. Perhaps a greater acceleration is required. And so here is an image of that circle of clockwork gears with the sun, the moon, the earth, the faces. In the center of the gear is an omega. This is reminiscent of the piece of paper. And the border on the left, there's a kind of a spiral, thin line drawn to the left. And the whole thing is now taking the relative shape of a triangle like before. For all history until this moment, it has been advantageous for the individual to limit his responsibility and identification to family, community, or nation. This limitation is the direct cause of our historical crisis. Our systems, institutions, and corporations must transform themselves, beginning in their most basic unit, the individual. Quarterly profit will no longer feed our cancer of society. Rather, compassion will sustain an evolution of our institutions, culture, and nature. The only solution, only way to balance our present insanity is for every individual to expand identity over every other individual, then to consciously and collectively act toward the spiritual development of the whole. The individual must realize that the earthly vessel is not just the body, but also the human collective and the world itself. The individual must then recollect his true nature, his or her true nature, not as a material unit, but as an eternal creative principle. We change the very nature of the world. New creative forms emerge in this historical moment. So we have an image here of that spiral towards the left. It is moving towards a line, which in the imagery, in the language of the imagery of this book, was once that piece of paper that held the drawings of cogs. So this is an image of the rectilinear motion, the spiritual motion that we are calling for here now. There's a face on the right-hand side of that line, and there's a sort of exuberant, energetic expression out of which there's a sort of flame-like motion, a sort of wave-like motion, vortex experience with spirals coming up and out of it, and then there's bubbles and things like that. And so that is the final image of this book, the preface and epilogue to the history of the world. And so I thank you for being here and contemplating this. I really do invite you to tune into your own greater spiritual capacities and understandings, to have the courage to go within, to find that rectilinear motion within yourself. And you might do that simply by committing yourself to a practice of mindfulness. So anytime challenges arise, anytime you see the pollution of our environment, the challenges that are presenting themselves through our social crises, our political issues, anything like that, you can use those as trigger moments to remember to wake up to your true and deepest nature. And once you do that, you can apply the intention to extend your own identity from yourself, from that moment of disgust with the world or pain or suffering in the world, and go, oh, I recognize that I am spirit and matter, and I want to be mindful of all beings here, this whole system. I find identity with that. And just by breathing and being present with yourself and your experience, right, and allowing yourself to come into greater identity with the experience of being in the body, you can really and truly bring in this spiritual eternal dimension into the historical progression. And you will likely be surprised at the miraculous experiences that emerge out of that. So thank you for doing that work, and setting that commitment here and now. I really do appreciate that you are spending time to explore these thoughts and feelings and communications about your own divinity and about how your own spiritual nature can manifest greater and greater in your life for the benefit of you and those around you. So once again, thank you.